Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Hello and welcome to the program for the 8th September 2020, which in our calendar is the 19th of Elul 5780. The shofar blast will remind you that we are in the period to prepare ourselves for Rosh Hashanah, which is in just under 2 weeks' time. Today, I am talking about religion in Jerusalem and how feminists attempt to change the routine at the Western Wall, and what I think of General Moshe Dayan. Some men want to change the airlines, and you will hear about that. I also tell you about the significance of names. As a tidbit, I disclose a few personal matters, nothing to do with politics, but I begin with what I believe is the most important news of the day, and that's not politics either, and a lot more. This week, for the first time since the corona outbreak, I went to an event with a large number of other people. It was a press conference, held in the open, of course, at Ir David, the city of David in Jerusalem. The reason was to make public the most important archaeological find ever in Israel. Not my description, but that of the Israel Antiquities Authority. And that's why I bring you the full report. It was introduced in Hebrew and English.
This discovery is really a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. It's not every day that we're able to discover something that 4 billion people around the world that have some type of identity to the Bible, to ancient Jerusalem, to the idea of discovering the Bible and unearthing the archaeology underneath the ground and connecting it to the actual place occurs. This is maybe once every few decades. And when something like this is actually revealed, when we actually see the elements coming to life that represent the Bible and this connection, it's the motivation of the Israel Antiquities Authority and the Ministry of Sport and Culture to then really try to invest the resources there and reveal it as quickly as possible, maintaining all the same scientific methods so that people around the world will connect to the archaeology in ancient Jerusalem.
Always challenging the status quo. Hello, I'm Rod Bryant on Beyond the Matrix here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. I want to encourage you to listen each week, every Wednesday at the same time, for an amazing show that will challenge you, inform you, and inspire. News, views, and wisdom for the nations here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Don't forget, Beyond the Matrix every week, Wednesday, here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Archaeology in ancient Jerusalem. As we know, the Israel Antiquities Authority are dealing with hundreds of excavations around the entire country. However, their profession is to continue excavating, yet understand what they can prepare and what they can offer to the general public. The discovery behind us, which was revealed by archaeologist Yaakov Bilig in Armona Netziv, is one such discovery, and we're convinced and sure that when the world sets their eyes on this discovery, they'll be excited not only about archaeology, about ancient Jerusalem, about the work of the Israel Antiquities Authority, but about the state of Israel as a whole.
Here is the director of the dig, Yaakov Bilig, talking to the international press in English.
30 years ago, I worked on the Armona Netziv Ridge. It's the governor's house or the commissioner's palace. That's where the main office of the High Commissioner of Palestine during the British Mandate was located. It wasn't located there by chance. It's because of its strategic location and the beautiful view overlooking ancient Jerusalem, the city of David, and the Temple Mount. That's the promenade where every tourist who comes to Jerusalem comes to view the city, and is inspired by the breathtaking view. 30 years later, I checked out a site in the preparation of a visitor center called Beit Schatz, and we expected to find antiquities there. Probing, we found rock cuttings, we found a lot of pottery, we found some building blocks, but we didn't really expect anything like what was to come. Later on, when we started the excavation, we found ruins of a structure with a layer of destruction, with shattered clay vessels and burnt stones. And one day, after you heard the scrape of the spade on top of a stone slab, I told the worker to brush it clean, and then I thought, maybe, Yaakov, you're in the sun too long, and drink some water and look again, and it was still there. The beginning of the facade of one of these beautiful stones lying flat upwards, and carefully cleaning it, because this was something worthwhile documenting in real time and not later. We cleaned the stone and prepared to remove it, and then we had two surprises. The first one was that it was decorated on the bottom side as well. We only saw that when it was removed. And the second was there was another one right underneath it. And that's also one of the enigmas of the site. How come these are two stones out of three of the same type that we found, which are placed one on top of the other? They didn't fall like that from the ruin. Someone took them and made like a purposeful burial or setting in the ground, and that's how they had the good luck of being saved, because the rest of the site was just about leveled. Whatever was possible to recycle and use somewhere else was taken. You saw the film before, how Yoli showed the true moments of how we found the first one, removed it, and found the second. Those were the moments of excitement. Until now, there are about 20 to 30 similar capitals, but they're reconstructed from several sites here in the city of David, Ramat Rachel, and other places in Judea and the Kingdom of Israel. They're probably the lintels of doorways leading into palaces. And the decoration on the stone is something of the local monarchy. It's a symbol. There are big slabs about 1 meter, 1 meter 30 long, and here we have a medium size, and they were probably of decoration on top of pillars in a courtyard. And besides them, we found later also miniature size, small or extra small, but they're only decorations of the balustrade in a window. We could reconstruct the whole frame of a window with a decorated sill. Later on, we'll be able to see a reconstruction of how we assume this window and this palace was ornamented. And because of the special symbol of these monarchical capitals, several years back, the State of Israel decided to put a proto-Aeolic capital on the 5-shekel coin. I'm sure these are worth much more. I assume they're even priceless. But the symbol on the coin of the State of Israel is also symbolic. And it's indeed a great privilege to reveal them and show the public in Israel and abroad the beauty of the relics of a royal estate located overlooking the capital and the Temple Mount. They weren't directly found in the rubble of the building. The building itself, we only excavated a small portion of the building. We were more in the outer plot of the estate. It seems definite that someone purposefully took the blocks from where they were originally placed in the structure or in the rubble of the structure and buried them, two, one on top of the other, in a niche alongside agricultural installation, and a third nearby. They're out of their original location, but they're identical in size. They're not the size of the other blocks we're familiar with, which are big lintels in a gateway of a palace, like in Hatzor and Megiddo and Tel Dan and Samaria, and in the city of David. Here, because of their size and logic and common sense in comparison to other architectural elements, we can assume that they were like capitals on top of stone pillars decorating a patio, a porch, a courtyard, or something like that. They're half a meter only. The smaller ones are a decoration. They don't have architectural function. They're a decoration in the same artistic style in a balustrade of a windowsill. And I thought that here they would be presented the reconstruction, but I can show the public later in a folder how an artist reconstructed the whole frame of the window based on the fragments we have here. These are only a few of the fragments that were found. The rest are in the storerooms. You can see they're still even dirty. The finds here are just as if they were just pulled out of the ground. I was asked on how we were able to date the finds. The first capitals that were found have been mostly in northern sites. Most of them haven't been found in situ in their original location, but in a later fill or secondary use. As far as our site is concerned, I can give you a date within the 7th century BCE. That means minus 700, the period of the reign from King Hezekiah, who survived the Assyrian siege on the city, until the reign of Josiah, who's just about the time of the destruction of the Babylons. That's minus 600. The whole strata with the rubble and all the fragments of pottery can be dated with a resolution more or less of several decades within the 7th century. All the pottery, jugs, cooking pots, lamps, the whole repertoire of fractured clay vessels that we found is all from that same time period out of the whole experience of research of other sites. Hopefully we'll also be able to get dating by OSL, which is a scientific method of getting a date of earthen fill. We also have other finds I'm not going to elaborate on now, of which we can give the date within the 7th century BCE, which is more or less the last century of the existence of the kingdom of Judah and the first temple. The site was in ruins, and for some reason these 3 blocks were saved. Was it a matter of sanctity? I don't know. Someone who wanted to keep the relics from being desecrated. There was a foundation trench which was totally looted and then later filled by the leftovers that people who were looking for new building blocks worthwhile recycling. So we found all the smaller pieces there, all broken. We're using our imagination and our comparative methods to try and reconstruct it based on the relics, the finds found there, and comparison to other structures found in other places. Besides the 5-shekel coin you're familiar with, maybe you noticed also when you have the signs pointing in the direction of some site of antiquities, you have this Proto-Aeolic capital as the logo. Well, now when you see a sign to some ancient site, you know where it came from. This style in a home is probably either royal status or someone who's very, very rich, very influential, someone who had the capability of building a mansion on I believe it's a royal estate.
First of all, I would like to thank archaeologist Jacob Billig for his incredible work and his literally groundbreaking discovery, no pun intended. Also like to thank Ambassador David Friedman, who was planning on being here, but currently is in the United States. I would like to thank all the donors who are involved in these excavations, who without their help, this would really never be able to make it to light. This is not just culture. Culture is kind of something that sits in a museum. This is culture that on one side has roots, which reach down to the bedrock, and on the other side has wings that literally help give inspiration to the state of Israel. The idea that we're the high-tech nation and at the same time the low-tech historical nation really define the state of Israel.
The person in charge of the dig where this discovery was made is, of course, Yaakov Billig, and he's sitting right beside me. Welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning, Walter.
So we've heard already a lot of speeches, but I'd like to know a little bit from the personal side. How did you feel when you saw that you had something extraordinary? And tell me exactly what it is.
It was a moment of great excitement, one of the peaks of a career.
Hear the rest of this interview and more after the break.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with Love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with Love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
The person in charge of the dig where this discovery was made is, of course, Yaakov Billig. I'd like to know a little bit from the personal side. How did you feel when you saw that you had something extraordinary?
It was a moment of great excitement. I have to admit in modesty that I can't boast that this was my palace. I can't even boast that I was the artist who made these beautiful pieces of art in stone. I'm just an archaeologist, the director of the archaeological dig, who had the historic privilege of uncovering them. They just waited for me underground for 2,700 years, and I had the privilege of revealing them.
What are they? And where do they come from? And how old are they?
We're talking about a royal estate dating 2,700 years ago. This is the century between King Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah, and King Yoshiyahu, Josiah, the 7th century BCE. This is more or less a time of Renaissance after Jerusalem and Judea recovered from the Assyrian siege led by Sennacherib, and before the city and the temple, the independence of the kingdom were destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. The site is on Armon HaNetziv in Hebrew. In English, it's the governor's house or the commissioner's palace, where the high commissioner of the British Mandate of Palestine had his mansion constructed about 100 years ago.
Where's that in relation to the center of the city?
It's about 2 kilometers south of the city center, 2 kilometers south of the city of David, and it's overlooking the ancient nucleus of the city of Jerusalem, where the city started, the city of David, the Ophel, and the Temple Mount. And the spectacular view from the promenade, whoever lived in that royal estate could see the city, the palace of the king, and the temple itself. It seems to be a grand estate. We put on exhibit only a few pieces of the finds excavated, which are the most beautiful of their type ever found in the country. Top quality of masonry and stone molding. If you take like a beauty contest, they're all beautiful there, but one is chosen as the most beautiful. So here we have the most beautifully made, and also they had the good fortune to be preserved almost in mint quality.
Did they work with a hammer and chisel in those days?
Some of the work was done with hammer and chisel, and some of the finer work was with finer tools, and the balusters, the little pillars of the windowsill, were made on a lathe, which is like a wheel. You take a block of stone and you turn it like a clay vessel on the wheel. Here also the stone was narrowed down to a beautiful shape.
Is that dig now complete, or are you continuing to find other things?
most of the dig is over. Unfortunately, in the site that we were able to excavate, there wasn't much that we were able to discover because the continuation of the site is under some of the nearby streets. Maybe sometime in the future we'll have the opportunity to expand the excavation. There's also possibility, hopefully soon, that we'll be able to document very large water cistern, and there's also another underground passageway that, if possible, we will also like to get to the end of it and see what it served for.
At the same location?
At the same location.
So what is your plan now for the future? Do you have any other assignments where you might find some interesting discovery?
I have nothing planned as of yet. We still have a lot of work to do on documenting the finds, writing the report, the book. Hopefully, when the corona will be over, we'll be able to also put the sites on a wide exhibit with more finds after they're cleaned and glued together. And hopefully we'll be able to speak in congresses when they will resume in their original manner.
One of the journalists asked you a question and your reply was, I have some ideas about this, but I'm not going to disclose them. Seeing that you are my cousin, maybe you want to tell it to me.
I'll tell you on a later opportunity. Since they're still theories, I'm hesitant about publicizing them as of yet, but hopefully it won't be long before we'll be able to give some notions. There are things that we find, you can call them artifacts and facts. Besides that, there is a lot of interpretation. We can give an idea, and it might be true and might not be true. Someone else could also suggest a different interpretation. And so we can try and suggest several ideas. When it'll be ready, I'll let you know.
Yaakov Billig, thank you very much, and here's to the next time.
Thank you.
When the world at large thinks of Israel, politics apart, it is Jerusalem that is their focal point. The many sites of our holy city are revered, but in some cases their origin and ownership are also disputed. Many Christian denominations cherish their heritage in this city, where Jesus is said to have walked along the Via Dolorosa, carrying the cross on which he was subsequently crucified. Each Christian denomination has their own place of worship, and I could not ascertain how many there are. Among the very large number of churches, there are many which claim a direct connection to the life and death of Jesus. Best known is the 12th century Church of the Holy Sepulchre, in the Christian quarter of the walled Old City, situated at the end of the Via Dolorosa, the spot where the crucifixion is said to have taken place. The Russian Church of Maria Magdalene was dedicated to the Russian Tsar in 1888. A marble sarcophagus contains the remains of the wife of Grand Duke Sergei, Elizabeth Fyodorovna, who was killed by the Bolsheviks during the Russian Revolution. An Eastern Orthodox church that dates from the 12th century is the Church of Mary's Tomb, supposedly situated near the burial place of their Holy Lady. It's lit by hanging oil lanterns. And the newest is the Neo-Byzantine Roman Catholic Church, also known as Basilica of the Agony of Gethsemane, at the place where Jesus was brought after having his last supper with his 12 apostles on Mount Zion, according to Christian belief. It stands at the foot of the Mount of Olives, where it was built in 1924 on the ruins of two older churches. The Muslim faith, the youngest of the three monotheistic religions, which dates to the 6th century, also claims a strong connection to Jerusalem, particularly to what is rightfully the Jewish site on which both temples stood, known as the Temple Mount. They have erected there two mosques. The Al-Aqsa Mosque was built in the 8th century near the place where the Jewish temple stood, and the Dome of the Rock at the other end of the Holy Mountain sometime during the 7th century. It was erected over the rock, which was, according to the calculations, the altar on which the Akedah took place, where Abraham was about to sacrifice his son Isaac as instructed by God. Therefore, this is also a historic and holy site for Jews. Unfortunately, subsequent historic events with consequences that reach to this very day are preventing the State of Israel to have complete control over the Temple Mount, which is administered and funded by the Waqf, the Jordanian Islamic Religious Endowment Authority. It includes the 2 mosques, archaeological sites, museums, and schools. Only the access for Jews to the Temple Mount is controlled by Israel's police. Within it, the conduct of Jewish visitors is strictly observed by the Waqf. Any hint of prayer by Jews, even movement of lips, is prohibited and a cause for expulsion from this, the holiest Jewish site. That is today the situation. During the 1967 Six-Day War, the Israeli army re-entered Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. We heard the commander of the brigade, General Mordechai Gur, call out the famous words, Har Habayit Beyadenu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. Unfortunately, General Moshe Dayan, who was defense minister at the time, made it his first act just a few hours after IDF Chief Rabbi Shlomo Goren blew the shofar and gave the Shehecheyanu blessing. Dayan removed the Israeli flag that the paratroopers had raised on the mount, relinquished control of the holiest Jewish site, and handed it back to the defeated Jordanians to administer. It was, in my view, the greatest act of Jewish treason in modern times, and it outweighed all Dayan's previous achievements and deserved the cancellation of any military honors as well as a dishonorable discharge from the IDF, instead of any commemoration of his life. Some unconfirmed reports stated that Dayan also wanted to hand control of the Western Wall to the Waqf, but there seem to have been strong voices against that. It has been reported just this week that the opening to the Second Temple Period area on the Temple Mount was sealed in concrete by the Muslim Waqf, another consequence of Moshe Dayan's despicable action in 1967.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Bentako, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany is but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
There have been suggestions that Moshe Dayan may have acted on the instructions of the then cabinet under Prime Minister Levi Eshkol, who was the founder of the Israel Labour Party. If that was the case, then Levi Eshkol and any others who supported that treachery also deserve, in my opinion, posthumous, ignominious treatment. Harsh words, I know, but the consequences of their actions speak for themselves. Until we again take control of the Temple Mount, the holiest site in our possession is the Western Wall that supports the Temple Mount. In charge of everything there is Rabbi Shmuel Rabinowitz, who keeps a halachically, that's according to Jewish law, tight rein. It is expected there to observe the decorum that becomes this holy place. Men have their section and women pray in theirs. For anyone who would like to have an event at the wall with participation of mixed sexes or in contravention of religious tradition or dignity, there is a special area of the wall a little further to the north, used regularly by the not so strictly observant and by visitors from abroad who wish to celebrate a family occasion by the wall. There are also women who collectively wish to conduct their own brand of service in the format used by men. Though frowned upon by the ultra-Orthodox, there is in principle no objection if held somewhere by themselves. But one group of women with an apparently militant feminist agenda are determined to change the status quo at the Western Wall. Calling themselves Women of the Wall, they turn up there at the beginning of each Jewish month for morning prayers, but not to pray quietly alongside other women, some of them regular daily attenders deep in thought, but to begin a loud communal service with their own leader, chanting the prayers and disturbing the devotion in that relatively small area. They arrive in prayer outfits prescribed for men, clad in talitot, the traditional prayer shawls, and wearing tefillin, the phylacteries, on their head and on their arms, making a mockery of the service. More than that, against Western Wall regulations, they covertly bring their own Torah scroll and at the usual place during a service, among all other quietly praying women worshippers, start the long routine of loudly reading from it. When asked by other women to desist from their practice, a loud confrontation begins, bringing the wall security guards in an attempt to quell the disturbance, and the number of people hurling insults at those women escalates. That has been the routine every month for the past few years. Now the powers at the wall have had to resort to searching the known individuals in an effort to prevent them from bringing religious items other than prayer books. Despite the fact that there is a perfectly suitable area of the wall further to the north where they can unhindered conduct their services, women of the wall insist to change the rules at the Western Wall to satisfy their feminist ambitions. The director of Women of the Wall, Moshe Dayan, penned an article that was published in this week's comment pages of the Jerusalem Post, titled, "Rabbis, Security Guards, We Forgive You." The acidity of that piece almost burned a hole in the page. And if I ever read intended cynicism, Rappaport left no doubt. She writes, and I quote, "We have entered the season of tshuva, repentance, a time to engage in repair for all we've done wrong this past year." End of quote. But then, under the pretext of forgiveness, she accuses everyone who has any connection with the Western Wall or who has ever criticized the offensive behavior of the women of the wall in these words, "who have caused us heartache and pain." Everyone did wrong except they, she claims. She accuses Chief Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef for inciting against them because he called them stupid women. She rebukes Rabbi Shmuel Rabinowitz of the Western Wall for ignoring their requests to hold what she called respectable services with the Torah scroll. She complains that the security guard of the Western Wall complex did their job to maintain the rules and ordinances of our holy place. She even turned political by accusing the Prime Minister for being weak against Orthodox Judaism and neglecting world Jewry relations, and Benny Gantz for not keeping his promise to nurture pluralist Jewry in Israel. While trying to lecture us about our conduct in preparation for the high holy days, she has the chutzpah to vent her unfounded grievances and accusations against those who daily keep to the commandments of the Torah, and not just on selected days to make their feminist points. I wonder if they pick up their prayer books daily or keep the other Torah commandments, especially for women. The events of women being asked to move seats in planes and rail carriages to accommodate the requests of ultra-Orthodox Jewish men is becoming more frequent as ultra-Orthodox communities grow in number and confidence, but also as other passengers, for reasons of comfort as well as politics, push back. Those discussions often result in the airplane's departure delay, and cabin staff is expected to placate irate passengers because airlines are keen that disputes are settled amicably. Firstly, because delays are costly in fuel, airport charges for occupying a parking bay with a passenger boarding bridge, preventing other flights from deplaning passengers, as well as the possibility of flight crew time limitation. There is also the imperative of retaining the custom of ultra-Orthodox flyers, particularly on routes between the United States and Israel. It is true that Jewish rabbinical law prohibits physical contact between men and women unless they are married, but many ultra-Orthodox communities are taking this prohibition too literally. The basis of this stringency is what has been described as a fence to prevent sexual pleasure. The eminent Orthodox scholar Rabbi Moshe Feinstein counseled that it is acceptable for a Jewish man to sit next to a woman on a subway or bus so long as there was no intention to seek sexual pleasure from any incidental contact. I believe in the laws of God, but I also expect mutual respect by men towards women without having to resort to physical reminders. The demands by those so-called men is a sign of weakness. Israel's Supreme Court has rejected the appeal of Malka Leifer, who is wanted in Australia for multiple sex crimes on her students, and ruled her fit for extradition. You might have thought that this is the end of this matter, which has been in the courts for the past several years, but apparently not in Israel. It is difficult to understand why the case is again being referred to a lower court, when it has already been shuttled between courts. Now, on September 21st, it will be up to the district court to decide if Leifer will be extradited. Will that open the possibility for further appeals so that she will again escape justice in Australia? She fled to Israel just hours before her arrest. And now, have you ever thought about names? Why do we have names? What is their significance? Well, we cannot just say, "Hey, you." They are the means by which we identify each other, but they also have a deeper significance. In Judaism, names have always been considered extremely important, and when they were given, the meaning was a prime consideration of its selection. It often embodied characteristics that the parents wished the infant to have, or experiences during the pregnancy or birth. We use names in synagogues to call men to attend the reading of the Torah. In cases where life hangs in the balance, we even changed a person's name to Chaim or Chaya, which means life, hoping that it will help. My own grandson was in such a situation when he was only 2 days old. Immediately we named him Chaim. It is said that the purpose is to confuse the angel of death. This belief embodied in the Talmud, Rosh Hashanah 16b, where it reads, 4 things can abrogate the decree of man: charity, supplication, change of name, and change of action. Today, with the help of God, my grandson Chaim ben Pinchas is now a healthy man of 44. We also ask for the name of a sick person to be called out during prayer in the presence of the Torah scroll, for God to bring about a speedy recovery. And when we have a lost or loved one and we remember them, we often drink a l'chaim, wishing for their soul to be elevated to a higher plane. Ashkenazi Jews never give a newborn the name of a living relative. Some fear that the angel of death might confuse the infant for the adult and take the wrong one. Others believe that it might rob the adult of their soul, as the name is tied very closely to it. Those whose family originate from Eastern Europe know that after the Napoleonic years of the early 19th century, names like Ze'ev ben Zalman, which happens to be mine, were no longer accepted in Western Europe as sufficient identification. Most of the Jews in countries captured by Napoleon were ordered to get surnames for tax purposes. After Napoleon's defeat, many Jews dropped these names and returned to the son of names, but in westernized form like Mendelssohn, Jacobson, or Levinson. It also happened in America at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. We've all heard stories from Ellis Island, which was the immigration gateway to America, where Jews were asked to adopt a Western name before being admitted, and how the old Jew was sent around the departments, and when he finally had a name and was asked for it at the very last window, he had forgotten it and told them, "Schon vergessen." He was promptly admitted as Sean Ferguson. That's just one example about changing Jewish names. Some Ashkenazi families have only had last names for 150 years or less, while the early American Jews were Sephardim, whose names stretched back for centuries. The adoption of Western names fell into 5 categories. Firstly, descriptive of the head of the household, like Klein, small, Gross, large, Levi or Cohen. Then there are names describing occupation. Schneider, which is tailor, or Fischer. Händler is dealer. Thirdly, names taken from the city of residence, Frankfurter, Danziger, Oppenheimer, or Berlin. Those are examples of what one could buy. Other more expensive names were gold, silver, or Kupfer, copper, associated names, and, of course, diamond. The last category were less desirable assigned names. Klotz, clumsy, Plotz or Platz, to burst. Many people thought that their Jewish-sounding names were retarding their progress in the Western world, and decided to disguise them in one form or another, or change them totally. Cohen became Kogan, Kohn, or Cohn. Kantorowicz might have become Kent. By the way, could Kantorowicz have been a chazan, a cantor who makes witz, who jokes? If you wonder about my own English name, Bingham, that was changed because I took part in the World War II Normandy landings to prevent me from being treated as a Jew rather than a prisoner of war should I have had the misfortune to fall into German hands. Many Jews in show business changed their names by which they became famous. Woody Allen was Alan Stewart Königsberg. a famous Prussian city, probably the origin of his family, now in Russia and called Kaliningrad. Fred Astaire changed from Friedrich Austerlitz, once a village in today's Czech Republic. Israel Berlin became Irving Berlin. Al Jolson was born Asa Joelson, and Joan Rivers was Joan Malinsky. Bob Dylan was born as Robert Zimmerman, which means a carpenter. Names are a fascinating subject, and I only touched on it. Perhaps you will be encouraged to research the origin of your own name. And finally, a very personal note. It was my lifestyle before the coronavirus hit us that kept me physically fit. I travelled all over the country to meet interesting people and get their stories. They may have been celebrities or farmers or soldiers on the Gaza border or politicians or ambassadors. I attended interesting meetings at the residence of our president and talks by knowledgeable academics and other experts at press events. All that has stopped some months ago and at best is replaced by strictly structured Zoom meetings where it's impossible to interrupt with a relevant question and assess the speaker by his or her body language. I am told, "Stay home, Walter, it's safer for you," or "Don't go out, it's too hot." "Don't go on a bus, it's too dangerous for you, there's no social distancing." I want you to know that I am too young to spend my days in a rocking chair, falling asleep while watching TV. The news is dominated by COVID-19 and the repetitive, self-promoting antics of our politicians. All very uninspiring and boring. In all, I am fed up to the teeth with having to watch where I go, what I touch, whom I meet, or have come to my home. I would never have dreamt that I would ask my guests to wash their hands before going any further, and then to offer them kitchen roll to dry them. My quality of life, like yours, has been severely dented. But after all that, I have to thank God that I'm still mobile and, most of all, that I have all my faculties to continue the task of transferring my thoughts into sound waves and newsprint, so that anyone interested can hear or read them. I would be remiss if I'd failed to tell you that my daughter, who also lives in Jerusalem, keeps a daily, caring eye on me. Thank you. I'm grateful for the many comments to my work by email or in the comment section. Thank you, listeners and readers. Let us hope that the restrictions we must follow to keep the nation safe will soon be a thing of the past, and that my blue Breton cap can again be seen at all the interesting functions. And finally, Israel's Supreme Court has rejected the appeal of Malka Leifer, who is wanted in Australia for multiple sex crimes on her students, and ruled her fit for extradition. Now you might have thought that this is the end of the matter, which has been in the courts for the past several years, but apparently not in Israel. It is difficult to understand why the case is again being referred to a lower court when the case has already been shuttled between courts. Now, on September 21st, it'll be up to the district court to decide if Leifer will be extradited. Will that open the possibility for further appeals so that she will again escape justice in Australia? She fled to Israel hours before her arrest. Let us hope that the district court upholds the Supreme Court's decision and that Leifer will finally face justice in Australia. And that brings me to the end for today. There are a few interesting items in preparation, so God willing, if I'm back next week, don't miss what's coming. In the meantime, this is Walter Bingham wishing you a pleasant week, a week of introspection and safe from the corona. Listeners in Israel are experiencing the hottest period of the year, with temperature reaching 38 Celsius here in Jerusalem and higher in some parts. That makes life extremely difficult for the elderly, so please take the time to check on your elderly neighbor. In extreme cases, even buy them a small fan. Thank you. Goodbye. Self-promoting antics of our politicians. All very uninspiring and boring. In all, I am fed up to the teeth with having to watch where I go, what I touch, whom I meet, or have come to my home. I would never have dreamt that I would ask my guests to wash their hands before going any further, and then to offer them kitchen roll to dry them. My quality of life, like yours, has been severely dented. But after all that, I have to thank God that I'm still mobile, and most of all, that I have all my faculties to continue the task of transferring my thoughts into sound waves and newsprint, so that anyone interested can hear or read them. I would be remiss if I'd failed to tell you that my daughter, who also lives in Jerusalem, keeps a daily, caring eye on me. Thank you. I'm grateful for the many comments to my work by email or in the comment section. Thank you, listeners and readers. Let us hope that the restrictions we must follow to keep the nation safe will soon be a thing of the past, and that my blue Breton cap can again be seen at all the interesting functions. And finally, Israel's Supreme Court has rejected the appeal of Malka Leifer, who is wanted in Australia for multiple sex crimes on her students, and ruled her fit for extradition. Now you might have thought that this is the end of the matter, which has been in the courts for the past several years, but apparently not in Israel. It is difficult to understand why the case is again being referred to a lower court when the case has already been shuttled between courts. Now, on September 21st, it'll be up to the district court to decide if Leifer will be extradited. Will that open the possibility for further appeals so that she will again escape justice in Australia? She fled to Israel hours before her arrest. Let us hope that the district court upholds the Supreme Court's decision and that Leifer will finally face justice in Australia. And that brings me to the end for today. There are a few interesting items in preparation, so God willing, if I'm back next week, don't miss what's coming. In the meantime, this is Walter Bingham wishing you a pleasant week, a week of introspection and safe from the corona. Listeners in Israel are experiencing the hottest period of the year, with temperature reaching 38 Celsius here in Jerusalem and higher in some parts. That makes life extremely difficult for the elderly, so please take the time to check on your elderly neighbor. In extreme cases, even buy them a small fan. Thank you. Goodbye.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.